Hi, I'm James and welcome to another review. Today we're looking at the Armchair General by John Buckley. Now, Professor Buckley is the Professor of Military History at the Department of History, Politics and War Studies at the University of Wolverhampton. So we're looking at quite a high level author with this. Now, when I was younger, some of you may remember the fighting fantasy game books or the choose your own adventure game books. This follows the same concept, but looking at the decisions for World War II. Now, it's not a massively long set of scenarios, and we'll look at those in a minute. They are interesting. They're presented as alternative history, and you have to actually choose what you're going to do. So what have we got? We've got a number of scenarios. We've got Britain's darkest hour, which is the summer of 1940, in particular the crisis as to who replaces Chamberlain. We've got the Mediterranean gambit, dealing with the war in North Africa, and really the Mediterranean as a whole, because it also picks up a bit beyond that. Stalin's war, the Eastern Front, in particular the leadership of Stalin and his breakdown during Operation Barbarossa. We've got the Battle of Midway, which is probably the shortest of the time periods covered. We've got the strategic bomber offensive against Germany. We've got the Casablanca Conference. We've got the race to the Rhine in September 1944 and the decision to drop the atomic bomb in 1945 and the build-up to it. So as you can see, the scenarios are generally very high level. We're looking at strategic with a little bit of operational decision making. I think I found there was one tactical decision in the book, so we are looking at quite high level decisions. Now, don't expect a short paragraph. You're talking a good few pages, bearing in mind there's those scenarios, and the book comes to 443 pages. So it's not a short book. You can see that it's quite a thick one. I'll look at one of the scenario chains and then we'll look at the sort of information that you're provided. So I thought we'd start with the first one. And the reason I picked the first one is if you want to look at sort of the writing, you could pick this one up on the Kindle as a sample and see some of the decisions. You don't get to the end of the scenario on the Kindle sample, but it does give you an idea. So the first one, this is Britain's darkest hour. You role play a different person in each decision, and you start off being given the information that David Madison, who's the chief whip in 1940, has. So he is presented with the information about Churchill and about Halifax, and has to give his put his weight behind one or the other, and that decision is the one that will then stand. So let's say you choose that you want Churchill, which is the historical outcome. It gives you you sort of read through it, you make the decision. You turn to the next chapter, and you're given another choice, but this time you're General Ismay, one of Churchill's main advisors, and you have the decision whether you negotiate or not. Now, if you decide to negotiate, it jumps you to another person, which is Alexander Cadogan, who's the permanent Under Secretary of the Foreign Office, and it gives you the outcome as he sees it. If you don't negotiate, you go to Archibald Sinclair's opinion, who was the Secretary of State for Air. So there's not a lot of decision making, there's only two decisions there. Let's go down the other side. You decide to support Halifax. You then get Clement Attlee, the Labour leader's opinion as to what's gone off and his information. And you have another choice now. You have the Horciano Pact, and you have to make the decision, do you try and negotiate or not? So if you do go for the pact, you then go to the background from Samuel Hoare, who's the Foreign Secretary, and what information he then feeds back to tell you what's happened. If you decide not to, it goes to Anthony Eden, who is the Secretary of State for War, and it gives his information. So again, on this side, there are only two decisions. So we've got a grand total of potentially 4 different outcomes. This is about the level of some of them. Some of them you make one decision and then that is it. You've hit the end of that decision tree. So you're not talking long, complex decision making. You're talking instead a more in-depth understanding of the topic. So, for example, let's open it up pretty much random. In fact, we'll go for the same one. So, looking at the very first decision we had as the Chief Whip, do we actually back Churchill or Halifax? We have a picture of the person that you're representing. You have an extract from Hansard, which is the record of speeches in Parliament for Admiral Roger Keyes' speech from the 7th of May. So you've got an extract from that. You've then got biographies of the individuals. You've got a picture of Churchill and Halifax, a picture of Churchill and Chamberlain, and an aide memoir which sums up the points. So I'll read this just to give you an idea. So Halifax is a highly experienced figure who's been in the cabinet for much of the 1930s. Churchill has high-level political experience dating back to before the First World War. Halifax would convey calm and assured authority in this time of crisis and uncertainty. Churchill will bring dynamism and energy to the leadership of the government. Halifax has the backing of the senior party leadership and the tacit approval of the opposition parties who need to be brought on board. Churchill has popular support in the country, essential to rallying support. Halifax is hesitant and appears to lack desire for the job. Surely self-belief and drive will be essential in the months to come. Churchill can be erratic and reckless. Consider Gallipoli and Norway. Britain needs clear analytical leadership rather than impulsive and costly disasters. So it does present both sides quite nicely. Now, if you go down the historical route, it's very easy to work out what's happened because that's what happens in real life. So we have the evidence. But what Dr. Buckley has done very nicely is he's taken evidence out of context, like a speech that somebody has made at a different point, but supports the argument that's being made. So the decisions are quite good from a historical perspective, which I think is a nice little touch. The evidence in there is quite good. There are maps, there's photos, there's diagrams. You've got an extract from speeches. There's some nice primary source evidence in here. Downside is the length of the decision-making tree. You are very limited on that. I did find it was very useful to go back, try the other ones, and see what do we think might have happened. I don't always agree with those decisions, and nobody would ever expect anybody to, but it does give a good overall picture of the background. The problem I find with the book, the biggest problem, is if you know the history, you're looking at it with hindsight. As somebody who is studying a master's degree in history, in military history, I find some of these, it's obvious what the right decision to make is with retrospect. Try and put yourself in the mindset of somebody who doesn't know that and goes off the evidence, and it can lead to some very interesting decisions. The classic one being, he discusses what put him onto the concept of this was discussing why the drop zone at Arnhem was so far from the bridge, and the implications of that, which is a whole video in itself. But that does set you thinking. For somebody who is heavily interested in the Second World War, knows a lot of the history, I don't feel that you get as much from this. Somebody who's fairly new to history, has got a little bit of an understanding of the Second World War, but doesn't have an in-depth knowledge, I think this would be good. The decision-making process with all the information is very good. And it sort of makes it a bit of a hybrid. You want somebody with no knowledge, but with sort of the good analytical skills. So perhaps it might appeal to somebody who is studying it for the first time. Perhaps upper end of secondary school might find it useful, possibly into the sixth form. That's an ideal level for this. For a wargamer, and being in mind, I am aiming this at wargamers. It's probably a bit it's interesting to get the alternative history side of things, but I'm in two stools with it. I love the concept. I think it's brilliant. The use of the primary evidence and things is fantastic, but the shortness of the decision making counterbalances that. I perhaps would have rathered a few less scenarios with perhaps extra choices in. But no, it's an interesting read. It's a good concept, and I would love to see more like this. I hope you found that useful. If you have, great. If not, well, either way, tell me about it in your comments below. I'd be interested to see what you think. Hope that's been useful for you, and I'll see you soon for another review.